After all the trouble we've been through, you want to marry me?
Well, I'm sure we won't get into trouble on a weekly basis.
At 82, Stefanie Powers still carries herself with that same timeless charm that made her and Robert Wagner the picture of perfection back in their heart-to-heart days. Even after all these years, she's managed to stay composed and graceful, dodging every question about the dark cloud that's followed Wagner, the one tied to the chilling phrase, the Catalina mystery. When asked, she only ever called him an old friend who once understood me better than anyone else. That quiet restraint made people believe she wanted to rise above all the drama, keeping the last bit of warmth between two Hollywood legends intact. But things just took a shocking turn. In a recent exclusive sit-down with Variety, Stefanie Powers finally broke her silence, and what she revealed left everyone stunned. She openly talked about the long-buried secrets hidden inside Natalie Wood's autopsy report, suggesting that some details might have been intentionally brushed aside. Even more startling, she brought up the massive fortune Robert Wagner inherited after Natalie's death, sparking endless whispers about why she's speaking now, after nearly 50 years. Has Stefanie finally decided it's time for the truth to come out? And let's not forget, how did Robert Wagner react once those words hit the public? The tension between the past and present is unreal. It all traces back to that haunting Thanksgiving night in 1981, when a thick fog swallowed the waters off Catalina Island, California. The sea was cold and still, and through the mist, the yacht's splendor shimmered faintly. The same luxury vessel where Wagner, the charming heart-to-heart star, once threw his glamorous parties. Something about that night never sat right, and now Stefanie's words might finally shake everything loose. But that night, everything changed in just a few short hours. The elegant yacht, once known for hosting Hollywood royalty, suddenly turned into the stage for one of the industry's most chilling mysteries. At dawn on November 29th, 1981, the lifeless body of Natalie Wood, the beloved star of West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, was discovered floating less than a kilometer from Avalon Harbor. The world froze that morning. She was found wearing a red nightgown, a life jacket awkwardly fastened backward, and socks still clinging to her feet. Her dark hair, tangled with seaweed, painted a heartbreaking picture. The autopsy revealed bruises on her wrists, knees, and arms, but officials brushed them off as post-mortem injuries. Yet in his private notes, Coroner Thomas Noguchi wrote something that changed everything. These injuries are not consistent with a natural fall. That explosive line never made it into the official report, leaving the public to wonder what was being hidden. According to Robert Wagner, the night before the tragedy, he, Natalie, and actor Christopher Walken, her Brainstorm co-star, had dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef, one of Catalina Island's upscale seaside spots. Wagner later described it as a calm, enjoyable evening, but the restaurant staff remembered it very differently. One waiter told the Los Angeles Times he slammed his glass on the table and Natalie just lowered her head in silence. Another diner nearby claimed they overheard Walken say, "You were born to act. Don't stop now." To which Wagner snapped coldly, "She should be home with her husband and kids." By 10 p.m., the trio returned to the splendor, but something in the air had shifted. The tension was thick, the night was foggy, and before sunrise, Hollywood would lose one of its brightest stars under the most mysterious circumstances ever. According to the yacht's captain, Dennis Davin, the atmosphere on board took a dark turn that night. He later told 48 Hours on CBS. There were sounds of bottles breaking, shouting, and then total silence. The tension had snapped. Wagner reported Natalie missing at 1:30 a.m., but witnesses near the harbor claimed they'd heard a woman screaming for help almost 2 hours earlier. That haunting timeline didn't add up, and investigators immediately started wondering if Wagner had delayed calling for help on purpose. When Natalie's body was discovered hours later, police labeled it an accidental drowning caused by intoxication. But even inside the investigation team, whispers began to spread. Some things just didn't make sense. There were no rips or tears on her life jacket, even though reports claimed she struggled in the water. No fingernail residue was ever tested, despite visible scratches on her wrists and the small dinghy she supposedly used to leave the yacht. It was found neatly tied up, still secured, like it hadn't been touched all night. Even more suspicious, parts of the official crime scene photos mysteriously disappeared, only to resurface decades later in 2011. By then, the media was relentless, refusing to let the case fade away. People magazine asked the questions everyone else was too afraid to say out loud. Why was her life jacket on backward? And why would someone terrified of water go out alone on a freezing night? Journalist Dominic Dunn from Vanity Fair summed it up with chilling words. I've seen people in pain, but I've never seen anyone suffer so carefully as Robert Wagner. That single line sent shockwaves through Hollywood. The case had seemed closed until 2011, when Captain Davern finally changed his story. He confessed that Wagner had completely lost his temper that night and even stopped anyone from turning on the yacht's lights to search for Natalie. That revelation reopened the mystery that's haunted Hollywood for more than 40 years. And this time, the silence around it started to crack wide open. The case didn't stay buried for long. By 2018, investigators reopened the file, and Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest. The updated report no longer called Natalie's death an accident. It listed the cause as undetermined. For a moment, it seemed like the mystery might finally drift into Hollywood history, until Stefanie Powers, Wagner's longtime heart-to-heart co-star, decided to finally break her silence. Stefanie and Wagner shared a bond that ran deep. They met on set back in 1979 and quickly became one of television's most perfectly matched pairs. She once described him as her kindred spirit, saying he understood her timing and emotions better than anyone else. After Natalie's tragic death, Wagner leaned on Stefanie for comfort, and the two stayed close for decades. But what Stefanie just revealed changed everything. In a recent Variety interview, she dropped a revelation no one expected. I read the autopsy file in 2012, and parts of it were redacted, she said. Some pages were missing from the public copy. Her tone hinted at something far darker. She claimed the original file contained notes about circular bruises around Natalie's wrists and deep abrasions near her ribs, evidence that somehow disappeared in the official 1981 version. Then came the bombshell line that shook Hollywood to its core. Stefanie stated, someone didn't want the world to know Natalie struggled. They just wanted to believe she fell. That single sentence sent shockwaves across the industry. Reporters scrambled to verify her claims, and it didn't take long before Vanity Fair's Maureen Orth stepped forward, confirming that Stefanie's story lined up with confidential documents she'd seen years earlier. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder. Had the truth about Natalie Wood been hidden all this time, right under Hollywood's glittering surface? Stefanie also confessed that after the tragedy, Wagner was no longer the man I knew. During the final season of Heart to Heart, she said he seemed distant, sometimes pausing mid-scene, his eyes lost in a blank stare, as if trapped in memories he couldn't escape. Stefanie remembered how he carried himself after that night, saying, he lived as if a shadow followed him everywhere. I don't think he ever truly slept again after that. Her words painted a haunting picture of a man consumed by something much deeper than grief. Though she never accused him outright, Stefanie's emotional recollections reopened a door Hollywood had long tried to bolt shut. If even someone who shared years of trust, friendship, and screen chemistry with Robert Wagner now insists key details were deliberately hidden, then maybe the core question still burns unanswered. How did Natalie Wood really die? The silence that once protected the story was cracking, and the truth was beginning to echo louder than ever. That single mystery reshaped how Hollywood viewed Wagner, not as the polished gentleman of screen legend, but as a man living in the shadow of secrets, where love, rumors, and unspoken truths tangled behind his charming smile. From that very incident, the world began to see the man behind the image. Back in the mid-1950s, when Hollywood was glowing in its golden era, a young face was being praised across America. The industry's newest aristocrat of the studio. That rising star was Robert Wagner. Barely in his 20s, 20th Century Fox pushed him toward stardom, billing him as the next Clark Gable, elegant, masculine, and effortlessly smooth, with a grin that could make anyone's heart skip a beat. Yet even then, fame came with a price. From that moment forward, Wagner's name became inseparably tied to one thing, an endless trail of dazzling love stories and jaw-dropping scandals that would follow him for life. People still remember those wild Beverly Hills days like they were yesterday. Back then, the city was a playground of non-stop parties, flashing lights, and champagne nights, and Robert Wagner was right in the middle of it all. He was a familiar face at the Beverly Hills Hotel, where reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner practically camped out in the lobby, just waiting to catch a glimpse of him. Wagner never disappointed. He was constantly spotted, stepping out with famous names like Joan Collins, Debbie Reynolds, and even Elizabeth Taylor. Each night, it seemed, he arrived with a new, dazzling companion on his arm. But the affair that truly sent Hollywood spinning was his secret romance with the legendary Barbara Stanwyck, the powerhouse actress of Double Indemnity, who was 23 years older than Wagner. They met while filming Titanic in 1953, and sparks flew instantly. At that time, Barbara was already a Hollywood queen, while Wagner was just a young actor trying to climb the ranks. But something about her strength and allure completely hypnotized him. The press couldn't get enough of them. Gossip columns overflowed with stories about their rumored relationship, and the Los Angeles Examiner even printed a late-night photo of the pair leaving the set together with a dramatic caption that read, "The veteran star finds her second spring in the arms of a man 20 years younger." It was pure Hollywood scandal, and fans ate it up. Years later, journalist Rex Reed added fuel to the fire when he revealed Barbara's own words. "He makes me feel young again. When I'm with him, I forget how old I am." That quote was all it took. The rumor was as good as confirmed. Still, their romance faced harsh criticism because back then Hollywood wasn't kind to couples with a wide age gap. Yet even with the world judging them, their connection burned bright, defiant, passionate, and unearthed despite the criticism and whispers. Robert Wagner and Barbara Stanwyck kept their secret love affair going for years. But that romance cast a long, haunting shadow over his life. It followed him into every relationship that came after, especially the one that would define his entire career and personal life, Natalie Wood. When Wagner met Natalie, she was just 18, a bright rising star and America's beloved screen princess. After Rebel Without a Cause, she was already an A-list sensation, adored by millions. Wagner, meanwhile, was trying to climb back into Hollywood's good graces, his career wobbling after a few box office flops. The two met at a glamorous Christmas party thrown by director Nicholas Ray, and from that moment, sparks flew instantly. Within months, Wagner proposed, and by 1957, they tied the knot in one of the most talked-about weddings Hollywood had ever seen. Their ceremony at the Beverly Hills Hotel was broadcast live on ABC, an incredibly rare event for the time. Life magazine splashed them on the cover with the headline, "Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner, America's Golden Couple." The world saw perfection, but behind those shining smiles, their picture-perfect love story was beginning to crack. Natalie's fame kept soaring. She was landing hit after hit, while Wagner's career started to stall. A close friend later told People magazine, "She said Robert loved her, but he couldn't stand it when she was more successful than him." That tension grew heavier with every new film offer Natalie received. On set, she bonded closely with her co-stars, and whispers of jealousy began to spread. Reporters from The Hollywood Reporter claimed Wagner had a habit of showing up unannounced on her film sets, especially when she was working with a male director or co-star. By 1961, the tabloids were in overdrive, printing rumors about Wagner's alleged affair with Swedish bombshell Anita Ekberg, fresh off her fame from La Dolce Vita. Hollywood was obsessed, and suddenly, America's golden couple didn't seem so golden anymore. Photos of Robert Wagner and Anita Ekberg soon flooded the tabloids. Confidential magazine even ran a scandalous spread of the two vacationing in Palm Springs, captioned, "The Nordic Rose and the Married Man." That headline said it all, and the fallout was brutal. Just a year later, Natalie Wood filed for divorce, writing only two simple words on the record, "Irreconcilable differences." No public fights, no courtroom drama, but everyone in Hollywood knew what those words really meant. After the split, Wagner tried to rebuild his life. In 1963, he married actress Marion Marshall. and together they had a daughter, Katie. But that happiness didn't last. 6 years later, that marriage ended too. Then, fate stepped in once again. In 1972, at a party hosted by Frank Sinatra in Malibu, Wagner crossed paths with Natalie Wood for the first time in over a decade. The two shared a slow dance to The Way You Look Tonight, and just like that, the old spark came roaring back. Their remarriage sent the media into a frenzy. It looked like the ultimate Hollywood love story, two stars finding their way back to each other after years apart. But behind that picture-perfect reunion, things weren't as fairy tale as they seemed. Natalie confided in her close friend, Mark Crowley, that she and Robert were seeing a marriage counselor, desperately trying to fix what fame and jealousy had once broken. Later, leaked notes from Dr. Eugene Landy, their Beverly Hills therapist, revealed something chilling. Natalie had expressed fear over her husband's sudden bursts of anger. That detail stayed buried for years until Stefanie Powers, Wagner's heart-to-heart co-star, unexpectedly mentioned it in a recent interview. She remembered how, even on set, Wagner carried an unpredictable energy, one moment warm and affectionate, and the next turning into someone entirely different in a heartbeat. It was as if the ghosts of his past were still following him, even when the cameras were rolling. Stefanie spoke with a blunt honesty that left no room for doubt. He was incredibly charming, she said, but there was also a darkness in him that only the women who loved him could truly understand. That single statement flipped the public's view of Robert Wagner upside down. Suddenly, the man once celebrated as Hollywood's ultimate romantic hero was being seen in a whole new light, a figure both captivating and deeply conflicted. Vanity Fair had written something years earlier that now sounded hauntingly prophetic. Robert Wagner walks among beautiful women as if through mirrors, and in each mirror he sees a reflection of himself, dazzling, yet distorted. Those words hit harder than ever. From Barbara Stanwyck to Natalie Wood, every love affair left a new layer of mystery, painting a portrait of a man who could make women fall madly in love, yet also leave them uneasy, unsure of the man behind the charm. When the tragedy off Catalina Island erupted in 1981, all those buried emotions and unanswered questions from his past came rushing back into the spotlight. Everything that had once been whispered in Hollywood circles was suddenly on display again, unfiltered and raw. The question that had been avoided for decades couldn't be ignored anymore. Was Natalie Wood's death truly an accident, or the heartbreaking end of a love story built on too many secrets? That haunting question sparked the next storm, a civil lawsuit that dragged on for years, dragging the long-suppressed truth back into public view. Each new piece of evidence, each statement, reignited old suspicions and reopened old wounds. Even after 40 long years, Natalie Wood's death still lingers like an open scar in Hollywood's heart. Because on that foggy night of November 28th, 1981, the waters off Catalina Island didn't just take a movie star. They swallowed the last illusion of Hollywood's perfect love. The tragedy sparked a mystery that's haunted American cinema for decades. And no matter the official line, an accidental drowning tied to intoxication, plenty of folks just didn't buy it. Among the skeptics was Lana Wood, Natalie's younger sister, who never accepted that conclusion and wouldn't let the questions die. Lana wasn't just family. She worked with Natalie, knew her secrets, and understood the tougher parts of her marriage to Robert Wagner. In interviews on Dateline NBC, Inside Edition, and Good Morning America, she pressed the same haunting question again and again. Why is everyone silent when the truth still lies at the bottom of the sea? That line hit like a cold wave, and it stuck. In 2011, Lana Wood teamed up with yacht captain Dennis Verne, who'd been aboard the Splendor that night, and released a fresh statement that lit up the town. In it, Davrin claimed he heard something heavy fall, a woman scream, and then a chilling silence, alleging Wagner was furious, throwing things and stopping anyone from turning on the lights to search for her. The claims were explosive, and Hollywood felt the tremor. The Los Angeles Times splashed the headline, "Lana Wood reopens the Catalina nightmare." The Hollywood Reporter called it the biggest crack in America's perfect husband image. Soon after, Lana hired a legal team led by Michael Aguirre and filed a civil lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court, demanding the entire case be reopened and her sister's body re-examined. The public reaction was instant and intense, with debates, hot takes, and renewed scrutiny flooding back into the spotlight. Within just a few days, every major outlet, from Vanity Fair to the Daily News, was splashing eerie photos of the yacht splendor across their pages, each one captioned with a haunting question. Was this really the site of an accident or the scene of a hidden truth? The media storm was unstoppable. Then, in November 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department made it official. They were reopening the Natalie Wood investigation. The new report sent shockwaves through the industry. It revealed chilling details that had never been made public before. Circular bruises on Natalie's body that matched fist marks, not a simple fall. And the most baffling discovery of all, her life jacket had been put on backward, something nearly impossible for anyone conscious to do. Those findings reignited every old suspicion and brought the Catalina mystery roaring back to life. In 2013, CBS's 48 Hours Mystery aired a bombshell episode titled Death in Dark Water, showing never-before-seen forensic photos, abrasions around Natalie's wrists that hinted someone might have tried to hold her back that night. The country was stunned. It was no longer just a tragedy, it was a possible cover-up. During a trembling interview with The Guardian, Lana Wood's words pierced through the noise. "I'm not seeking revenge. I just want to know what really happened to my sister. I want that man to answer." The entire nation went silent because everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. By 2018, the Los Angeles police reignited the fire again. Robert Wagner was officially listed as a person of interest, someone possibly directly involved in the case. Even though no charges were filed, those 4 words alone, person of interest, were enough to shatter his carefully built image all over again. Vanity Fair journalist Maureen Orth summed it up perfectly. Robert Wagner spent years playing the role of the grieving widower, but the ghost of Catalina has never let him go. And through it all, Wagner stayed completely silent. No interviews, no public appearances, just a short, carefully worded statement from his lawyer. It was as if he'd decided to disappear into the very silence that still surrounds that dark November night. There is nothing new to say, Wagner's lawyer claimed. But that silence only made everything worse. The public didn't see quiet anymore as dignity or defense. It felt like a confession without words. Every pause, every gesture, every public appearance Wagner made after Natalie's death was dissected, replayed, and judged under a microscope. People wanted answers, and silence only fueled the fire. Even Stefanie Powers, his heart-to-heart co-star and one of the few people who truly knew him, noticed something haunting behind his calm exterior. In an interview on CBS Sunday Morning, she remembered, he would sit silently for hours between takes, his eyes completely empty. I used to think it was grief, but now, looking back, maybe it was something deeper. Those words hit like a punch to the gut. She also revealed a chilling moment she never forgot. During a shoot in Hawaii, Wagner once told her, "Sometimes I can't sleep at night because I still hear the sound of water." That quiet confession, recalled years later, sent shivers down people's spines. It was the kind of line that sticks in your head, impossible to shake off. The Wood family's civil lawsuit turned into more than just a court case. It became a war over memory, over truth itself, and the glossy image Hollywood fought so hard to protect. Lana Wood didn't win in the courtroom, but she won in a much deeper way. She forced the world to ask that haunting question all over again. What really happened on the waters of Catalina? And from those reopened files, old wounds bled back into the spotlight, bringing sorrow, but also exposing something darker. A quiet, tangled conflict over wealth, inheritance, and hidden interests that surfaced after Natalie's death. That's when the real shadow of the tragedy started to show, where money, fame, and trust collided and tore apart everything that once seemed golden. Beneath all the glitz, secrets that had never been spoken out loud were beginning to whisper through Hollywood again, just days before the next shocking twist would send it all spiraling even further. When Natalie Wood's body was finally recovered, Hollywood froze in shock. The city of dreams turned eerily quiet, wrapped in an icy grief it hadn't felt in decades. On December 3rd, 1981, her funeral was held at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, a farewell fit for a legend. The guest list read like the golden pages of Hollywood itself. Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, Gene Kelly, all standing shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed beneath a sea of white flowers, mourning the woman once called the Heart of Hollywood. The Los Angeles Times described the ceremony as so silent, one could hear muffled sobs between the relentless flashes of cameras. Even in her final moments, Natalie was surrounded by the spotlight, but this time it felt cold. And before the funeral flowers had even wilted, quiet whispers started to spread behind the scenes. The question was sharp and immediate. Who would control Natalie Wood's estate? According to her 1978 will, Natalie's entire fortune, estimated at around $3 million, was to be left to her daughters, Natasha Gregson Wagner and Courtney Wagner. The assets included her elegant North Beverly Drive home, her Palm Springs retreat, and the steady stream of royalties from West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause. But there was one crucial detail. Robert Wagner, her widower, had been named the sole guardian of both the children and the estate. That title carried enormous weight, both an honor and a deep financial power. For a short while, everything looked calm. Wagner was often photographed with his daughters, smiling softly at tributes to Natalie, his arms around them like a picture of quiet strength. Those photos gave the world a sense of comfort, a momentary illusion of healing. But that peace didn't last long. Barely 6 months later, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner dropped a headline that shattered the calm and dragged the tragedy right back into the public eye. Then came the headline that reignited every whisper. Robert Wagner had sold the Palm Springs villa, the very home Natalie once lovingly called my safest haven. Along with the house went much of her jewelry and personal art collection, items that had once been deeply tied to her life and legacy. Wagner's official explanation: he claimed it was all to cover the costs of raising the children. But that reason didn't sit right with everyone, especially not the Wood family. Natalie's mother, Maria Zakharenko, and her sister, Lana Wood, spoke out immediately, calling the decision far too sudden, far too cold. In an interview with Entertainment Tonight, Lana didn't hold back. No one truly grieving would liquidate a loved one's belongings just months after their passing, she said. That single line hit harder than any lawsuit. It made the public stop and look at Wagner in a whole new light. As the years rolled on, Wagner's control over Natalie's estate only seemed to grow stronger. Tax documents from 1984 revealed his name tied to nearly every commercial deal involving Natalie's image, from film re-release rights and promotional campaigns to the reprinting of her archived photos. It was as if every trace of her legacy now ran through him. Part of the initial revenue had supposedly gone toward the Natalie Wood Art Scholarship Fund, created to honor her passion for the arts. But mysteriously, the fund was dissolved barely 2 years after her death. No reason was ever given, and Wagner never publicly addressed the decision. Then, in 1986, the New York Daily News released a bombshell investigative piece quoting one of Natalie's close friends. She reportedly said, "If anything ever happened to me, my mother would look after the children, not Robert." Though the claim couldn't be verified, it sent shockwaves through Hollywood once again. The implication was chilling, and for many, it added a brand new layer of suspicion to a story that just wouldn't die. As time went on, the public's doubts grew louder. People began to suspect that Robert Wagner wasn't just the legal beneficiary of Natalie Wood's estate. He was the only one truly benefiting. Wagner himself kept completely silent. But his lawyer, Fred Luskin, stepped forward, insisting everything is transparent under California law. Still, as Vanity Fair later wrote, transparency on paper doesn't always mean transparency in the heart. That line cut deep, and it stuck. Then came an image that sent Hollywood spinning. Barely 2 years after Natalie's death, Wagner was spotted driving through Beverly Hills in a brand new silver Rolls-Royce with actress Jill St. John, Natalie's former close friend, by his side. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and the whispers turned to roars. People magazine's September 1983 issue ran the headline, "The famous widower has found new comfort." It sounded gentle on paper, but the public read between the lines, and they didn't like what they saw. Many believed the site proved Wagner had moved on far too easily, that maybe he had never truly grieved at all, but not everyone saw it that way. Stefanie Powers, his heart-to-heart co-star and longtime friend, offered a different perspective in an interview with Closer Weekly. She recalled, "I once saw him sitting alone in his trailer, staring into space like he was talking to someone. I asked who, and he said quietly, 'I still hear her voice sometimes.' That haunting confession revealed a man who was haunted, not healed." Stefanie believed that Wagner's wealth and fame brought him no real peace, only fear and guilt he couldn't shake. After 1982, she said, he changed completely. He became withdrawn, quiet, and never mentioned Natalie unless someone else brought her up. Her words painted a tragic portrait of a man living behind glass, visible to everyone, but unreachable inside. What made everything even murkier was the growing rift between the two families. The Woods quietly accused Wagner of treating Natalie's estate as his personal property, while Wagner's camp insisted he was only protecting what was left for his daughters. Behind closed doors, grief, suspicion, and money mixed into something poisonous, and the golden glow of Hollywood love was long gone. Wagner's side claimed the Wood family simply refused to accept reality. But that explanation didn't make the bitterness fade. The dispute never made it to court, yet the tension between both families lingered like a ghost for years. By the late 1980s, Wagner had officially moved in with Jill St. John, and in 1990, they were married. The public called it a new chapter for Hollywood's once grieving widower, but behind the applause, there were whispers that he was simply writing his next act upon someone else's pain. The issue of Natalie Wood's estate never saw the inside of a courtroom, leaving a permanent fracture between the Woods and the Wagners. One side was convinced justice had never been served, while the other insisted it was far too late to reopen old wounds. Amid the contracts, the sold mansions, and the money trails that seemed to disappear into thin air, one thing still stood untouched by wealth or time: the truth. Maybe that's why, when Robert Wagner published his memoir, Pieces of My Heart, in 2008, people weren't just curious about the memories he chose to share. They were desperate to see what he'd still refused to reveal. After nearly 30 years of silence, he suddenly stepped back into the spotlight, smiling calmly, his eyes carrying a quiet sadness that only deepened the mystery. But Wagner didn't return through film or television. He chose a far riskier route: the written word. His memoir, published by HarperCollins, was introduced as a letter of apology to the past and to the people I loved. Yet to many readers, it didn't feel like an apology at all. It felt like a courtroom in print, where Robert Wagner stood as both the defendant and his own defense attorney. Across more than 400 pages, he laid out his version of events, smooth, detailed, and heartbreakingly polished. But for those who had followed the story for decades, every sentence seemed to carry a question mark instead of a period. His words weren't just reflections, they were shields carefully placed between himself and the truth that Hollywood still couldn't stop chasing. In his memoir, Wagner took readers back to the glittering golden age of Hollywood, the 1950s and 1960s, when he was the rising heartthrob groomed by 20th Century Fox as the heir to Clark Gable. He painted vivid scenes of red carpets, flashing bulbs, whirlwind romances, and the kind of loneliness that only comes when the world's eyes are constantly on you. But beneath the nostalgia, one section of the book sparked a storm unlike any other. The chapters devoted to Natalie Wood, the woman he called the love of his life. Over 70 pages were written about Natalie, filled with poetic regret and haunting reflections. Wagner described her as a flame that never went out, calling her death a tragic accident with no one to blame. He denied any arguments or jealousy, insisting it was simply a cruel twist of fate on a foggy night at sea. But that version of events didn't sit well with the public because almost every detail clashed with what witnesses had said for decades. Captain Dennis Davern, the only surviving witness aboard the Splendor that night, told NBC that Wagner had lost his temper, thrown things, and delayed the search. Yet in Pieces of My Heart, Wagner portrayed Davern as a loyal friend who had done his best under difficult circumstances. The contradiction was glaring, and critics pounced immediately. Vanity Fair's Maureen Orth fired back with a biting remark. Wagner tells the story as though he were the only victim of that tragedy. Even the Los Angeles Times didn't hold back, running a headline that cut deep. Pieces of My Heart, or Pieces of Her Story. It was a brutal accusation suggesting Wagner was rewriting not just his memories, but history itself to clean his own image. And Natalie wasn't the only one Wagner revisited. The memoir dove into his other famous love affairs, Barbara Stanwyck, Jill St. John, and beyond, painting them all with the same shimmering nostalgia. But behind every polished sentence, readers sensed the same thing critics had warned about. A carefully edited truth told through the eyes of a man who still couldn't face the one story Hollywood would never let him forget. He wrote about Barbara Stanwyck, 23 years his senior, with real tenderness, dropping the line, "She taught me how to live and love in a world that isn't kind." He even recalled being locked in by Marilyn Monroe's gaze at a Chateau Marmont party, plus a quick spark with Joan Collins that had the press coining the phrase Wagner's Web of Women. It was glossy, it was old Hollywood, and it was meant to dazzle. But what really set people off wasn't who he loved. It was how he painted them. Natalie, according to Wagner, was sometimes too sensitive. Barbara was so lonely she couldn't refuse affection, and Joan was fiery but lacking depth. In that soft, reflective tone, he turned the women who once defined his life into background players, supporting characters in a story where he alone held center stage. Still, Pieces of My Heart shot straight onto the New York Times top 10 bestseller list, and Wagner hit the big shows. Larry King Live, The Today Show, Oprah, laying out his version of that night at sea while the rooms went silent. He'd pause, lower his head, and say, "I'll never forget the last image of her." But to many, it didn't feel like raw grief. It looked rehearsed, like a performance built to sway hearts, not tell hard truths. The fiercest clapback came from Lana Wood, Natalie's younger sister, who didn't hold back for a second on Access Hollywood. She said bluntly, "He wrote it to hide his guilt, not to tell the truth." Then she doubled down. "That book is a way to erase my sister's memory." Lana believed Wagner timed and shaped that memoir to protect himself, not history, and that claim kept the spotlight burning hot. Wagner released Pieces of My Heart at a moment when most witnesses were either elderly or gone, shaping public memory while no one was left to challenge him. But he wasn't done yet. 6 years later, in 2014, he dropped a second memoir titled You Must Remember This. If his first book had felt like a desperate plea for vindication, this one read more like a smooth, nostalgic stroll through old Hollywood. Wagner filled its pages with glittering memories, late-night parties with Cary Grant, film sets shared with Bette Davis, and glamorous dances alongside Elizabeth Taylor and Sophia Loren. It was drenched in golden age charm, like a love letter to the past. But once again, controversy followed close behind. The part that stirred public outrage came from his vague revelations about supposed secret romances, including one with Audrey Hepburn, whom he called the woman who made me want to be a better man. No one could verify the claim, but it didn't matter. It pushed his name back into the headlines all over again. Critic Janice Min from The Hollywood Reporter captured it best. Robert Wagner understands the media game. He doesn't need to prove the truth. He just needs to tell it well enough that people forget to ask. That single sentence summed up the whole performance perfectly. But the most surprising twist in the book wasn't about Hepburn or old Hollywood. It came in a small, emotional chapter dedicated to Stefanie Powers, his longtime heart-to-heart co-star. Wagner called her the most beautiful soul I've ever met. Fans saw it as a touching tribute until years later when Stefanie shattered that perfect image. In a 2024 interview with the Daily Mail, she revealed that Robert Wagner had two selves, one that the world adored and another that few ever saw. Her words peeled back the polished surface of Hollywood's charming gentleman, hinting that behind the charm and grace lay something far more complicated and far darker than anyone had dared to believe. One side of him was the smooth, witty charmer everyone adored, but the other was a quiet, guarded soul, always hiding something in the shadows. On set, he'd sit for hours, staring past the lights like he was somewhere else, then suddenly laugh like he was covering up whatever was boiling inside. He never spoke directly about Natalie, she said, but the second her name came up, he'd drop his gaze like he was seeing something only he could see. Stefanie shared that when Pieces of My Heart dropped, Wagner mailed her a copy with a note that read, "This is my truth," but she never fully bought it. He writes beautifully, she said, but I can feel there are chapters missing, the ones he didn't want anyone to read. That hit different because it wasn't a critic talking. It was someone who knew him, worked with him, and defended him for years, which reignited the whole storm all over again. By the end of You Must Remember This, he still left the biggest questions hanging. No straight answers, just polished memories. Each line read like a velvet curtain, soft on the surface, hiding what mattered most while keeping every eye locked on him. Afterward, he stepped away from Hollywood and settled in Aspen, Colorado with Jill St. John, far from red carpets and bright lights. But memories don't clock out, and silence doesn't erase what people can't forget. Even now, deep into his 90s, the moment Robert Wagner's name surfaces, two images instantly flash through the public's mind: the haunting tragedy off Catalina Island and the two books he left behind, each telling a story that never fully aligned. And now, as Stefanie Powers, at 82, finally steps forward to speak her truth, Hollywood is holding its breath all over again. Because she isn't just the woman who once stood beside Wagner on screen. She's the one who saw the man behind the mask, the cracks behind the charm, and maybe the secrets that were never meant to be told. Her words could be the missing piece of a puzzle the world has spent more than 4 decades trying to complete. A puzzle built on love, loss, and the lingering question of what really happened that foggy night on the water. Is this finally the moment when silence gives way to truth? Or will Hollywood once again turn its back on the answers buried in its own past? If this story gripped you and you want to uncover more untold secrets from behind the silver screen, where glamour walks hand in hand with hidden truths, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.